Hello and welcome to the first of our UTech MEFPU Middle East Foam and Polyurethane webinars in 2021. I'm Simon Robinson and I'll be your host today. I'm moderating this and Jörg Parmersheim of Isoprene is going to be presenting. But before we get started, there's just a little bit of housekeeping that I'd like to get out of the way. You can listen to this webinar either using your computer audio, or I think there may be a dial-in connection. If you want to dial in, then please check the confirmation email you'll have received with this webinar. Now, I'm assuming that you can all hear me. And please put everything like phones, computer audio onto mute. If we hear a dog barking in the background, our technology allows us to find out who it is exactly. We will be taking questions during the presentation, but if you have a question, please use the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, which should enable you to ask a question in a sensible way. I will be moderating them all and grouping them together. I have to say that if you want a question to be asked, your best strategy is to keep it short. We don't want long essays from you or things discussing. Questions, as I say, will be moderated. We will start the presentation in just a few seconds, and as we do that, I'd like to welcome Jörg Parmersheim, General Secretary of Isoprene and ALIPA, the European Associations for Manufacturers of Aromatic and Aliphatic Diisocyanates and polyols. Jörg is well known in the industry and needs little introduction from me, so I'll ask him to take it away. Jörg, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And also from my side, I wish everybody either a good morning or a good afternoon, wherever you are on this globe. I'm very thankful to Urethane Technologies and Simon to give us the opportunity to inform you about the latest state of play with regard to the restriction. So thank you to that. And yeah, in the meantime, I think we all have come very familiar with the use of webinars, and the technology has advanced. So that makes also from that end life a little bit easier. Before I start, I need to ask Simon, do we want to do the first poll question right now, or?
Well, shall we do that to see how people feel?
Yes.
Okay. So if you'd like to go and look at the polls tab on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find we've got 4 questions. If you'd like to answer the first question now, that would be very helpful. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. Brilliant. Okay, Jörg, so far we've got 60% of people saying they feel, well, 58%, 56% of people, it's live, saying that they feel informed. So let's see if we can get that closer to 90, shall we, by the time we finish?
Excellent. All right, then we have prepared a presentation, and which you now should see on screen very shortly. And with that presentation, we want to, as I said at the beginning, inform you about the latest state of play. So technology-wise, I just... Donna, okay, here we go. So as introduced, we want to talk mainly about the restriction, but not only. So after the welcome, I just want to explain to you briefly about Isoprene and ALIPA, and then we step right into the core of our today's session, which is the restriction on isocyanates. And I want also to use the opportunity to talk to you about another regulatory activity which is going on since I think almost 1.5 years, which is about the occupational exposure limit for diisocyanates, and that will be at the end of my presentation. Talking about Isoprene and Alipa, I think most of you are well aware. Simon nicely introduced ourselves already. Nevertheless, Isopa is the European Trade Association for the producers of isocyanates and polyols, the aromatic ones, the main building blocks to produce polyurethanes, and our member companies are Huntsman, Shell Chemicals, Dow, Bosotchem, BASF, and Covestro. And then we have, as I used to say, our smaller sister, which is called Alipa, which is the European Aliphatic Isocyanate Producers Association. And our member companies here are BASF and Covestro, like in Isopa, and also Vencorex in France and Evonik in Germany. The key purpose of our associations is to inform and to advocate about our substances, to ensure safe use and handling. And I think with that, we are already right in the middle of our main purpose, to make sure that our value chains are well aware about our substances and well informed and trained about the safe use of those substances. Let's talk about the restriction on isocyanates. So on February last year, the REACH committee of the European Commission adopted the restriction. And after the publication in the European Journal, which happened somewhere in August last year, the so-called transformation phase has started. That means from the 3rd of August until the 24th of August 23, we have the so-called transformation phase. And during that phase, everybody who is using as an employee or as a self-employed person isocyanates, either as a substance or as a mixture, has to make sure that he has undergone the training, which is outlined in its elements and details in the legal text. We as industry, since the process has started, accompanied that process, because we as industry believe that the training of employees is the best risk management measure to handle and use isocyanates. So therefore, it's one of our highest interests to make sure that this training and the training material gets well distributed among the European Union, to allow also those employees from our downstream sectors to receive the training and to get trained. Important to understand, because this is also a question which has been raised quite regularly, is what is in scope and what is out of scope. Out of scope is everything which has less than 0.1% of cumulative diisocyanate concentration. In that case, neither the so-called placer, so the company who is selling the product, so to say, and the user, the person or the company or the employees using the product, are being not affected by this restriction. So there's no need for those to undergo such a training, purely because there is no exposure risk. But I have to say, this applies for the minority of applications in our industry. Everything which is above 0.1%, as you can see it from the left box, does require the training I'm just talking about, because the risk of exposure does require that. So what does the restriction actually establish? So as said, a kind of minimum requirement for training. The requirement to our diisocyanate member companies, but in general to everybody who's supplying isocyanate, to provide training material in the official language of the member state where the supply of the substance or the mixture is taking place. There's also an obligation to include this information on the packaging. On the other hand, it means for all those who are working in our value chains and using the substance that they have to document that they have been trained or that the training has been taking place for their employees. And this training, once the transformation phase has been ended, needs to be renewed every 5 years. There is also a reporting obligation for member states. So the Commission wants to review the restriction and the success of the restriction after a period of time, and member states have to report about the progress and the impact of the restriction in their country. We as Isoprene, as I said already, have worked since the beginning of the whole process back in 2014, together with major downstream sectors to follow the process, and then once the restriction was adopted in February last year, to develop the required training material. And we are not only developing the training material, we are also working together with a company based here in Brussels, closely together to establish what nowadays is called a platform. The platform will provide the different levels of training as they are being required in the legal text. And by that will enable everybody who is using isocyanates to take a training. You see from the slide the major downstream sectors which or who aligned themselves with us to develop the training material. So what is the status about the training material? As you can see from this slide, our ambition is to create and deliver a process which is responsive for laptops, for tablets, and for smartphones. And we will, at the end, offer 3 different possibilities. Either the person who wants to undergo the training takes a so-called e-learning or web-based training on his or her own. Secondly, a trainer creates an event or a training on the platform, and by that offering with the date and the location, the chance for employees to receive the training by a trainer as a face-to-face classroom training, or in case there is a need to have the training on a virtual basis, also this will be allowed on that platform. The whole process will start with a simple and straightforward assessment to understand in which sector you are working, which main tasks you're undergoing, because then, depending on that assessment, your personal training path will be developed. You will have to register on the platform, and then you receive a confirmation email. There has to be a payment, and once you have the email received, you basically can undergo the e-learning. The e-learning will be finished by a quiz where you have to answer a number of questions, and you have also the chance to evaluate the e-learning or the classroom training, the trainer, for example, in order to allow us to receive feedback to improve the entire process. At the end of the e-learning, you will receive a certificate which you can use for the documentation towards authorities in case of an enforcement. The high-level structure of our entire training material you can see on the next slide. So at the beginning, as I said, you will find an assessment and then a short introduction why you should do this training. And from there on, you basically step either into level 1, which is the general training as defined in the legal text, And depending on your task and your application, you might be required also to take a level 2 training, and potentially, maybe depending again on the task and your sector, also a so-called level 3 training. At the end of all these trainings, you will receive one certificate documenting your training. The next slide just shows you how a classroom training is compiled. So we have prepared already for the level 1 training the slide deck, which consists today of around 53 to 54 slides. You will also have what you can see in the middle of this slide, short briefings. There are 6 or 7 briefings available. You can print them out as a trainer or also as an employee to keep them as a reminder, or to put you somewhere on the wall in the facility where you're working on, to remind you of the major takeaways of that training. And on the left-hand side, this should illustrate the trainer guide, which gives the trainer an introduction to the training and guides the trainer to the major steps of the training, so that the trainer is prepared, is able to prepare himself for the classroom training. That is completed for level 1 training in English, and we are currently translating this level 1 training into German. The training includes also 3 brand new videos. One video is about sensitization. So I think most of you will know that the risk of isocyanates is sensitization. So we are convinced that this should get a dominant place also by a video. Secondly, again, very important in the entire safe handling and using of isocyanates, in case that an accident is happening, first aid and the first steps to be done is also very important. So we thought also for that we will have a video. And thirdly, again, a very important piece in the entire safe handling of isocyanates is your personal protective equipment. So also here we developed a brand new video. All these videos will be also translated in all relevant EU languages. Currently, we translate them into German. We have also established a process for trainers. So basically, talking about trainers, we would categorize the trainer into 3 different boxes. The first category for us are those who are giving already today trainer, being employed by one of our member companies and using Walk the Talk or We Care That You Care. Those experts are entitled to be a trainer, and they could register themselves on the platform and could offer trainings. Second category are those who are giving today, under a national workforce legislation, already safety instructions to their employees about isocyanates. Also, those people would naturally be qualified to be a trainer, to give the training of the material which we have developed. And thirdly, category number 3 would be all those who are coming from external training institutes, not directly from the isocyanate industry or being employed by a downstream company. And those would need to prove that they have a background of safety instructions, of a safety goods advisor or similar, and they would be then assessed and approved by a committee out of ISOPA and ALIPA. And once this assessment and approval has been done, they could also register themselves on the platform and would then be able to offer trainings either as virtual or as traditional, conventional classroom training. This system will allow us also, depending on the feedback, if a trainer does not perform and not deliver as desired, based on the feedback from the trainees, such a trainer could be in theory also then excluded from the platform again.
Excuse me, Jorg. Would it be a good time now to take another poll?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for reminding, Simon. I almost forgot it. Excellent.
Right.
Yes.
So perhaps we could take our second poll to find out whether people here would prefer to be taught in an e-learning environment or in a classroom. So if you'd like to vote on the second poll on the right-hand side, are you in favour of e-learning or the classroom learning process? Well, I think that's looking more emphatic than almost any poll I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, with nearly 80% of people saying that they would prefer to be taught in an electronic process, possibly on their phone or on their tablet, rather than trooping into a classroom. So just thank you very much for that. Back to you now, Jorg.
Thank you, Simon. Very interesting, I have to say. Very impressive and also very important for us to understand and to learn, especially this second question. Yes, so coming back to our project, so I indicated already that we are working together with a digital communication company, and we have chosen the company ID Loom, which is based here in Brussels. It's a company which is founded in 2015 with offices in the European Union, but also in the United States and the United Arabian Emirates. They are well established also here in the Brussels scene. They are working for prominent associations like CEFIC and Plastics Europe, but also for big corporates like the BMW Group or Boeing. And they are also engaged in education and working also with governmental bodies like the National Bank of Belgium. So quite a very well-established company with a good background. And we are working with them together since almost 6 months now. And we are in close contact at the moment with weekly jour fixe to make sure that this platform is well developed. How will this platform look like? So that is a rough idea. So as I said at the beginning, there will be a website with an assessment. And then you will be, based on the assessment, led to your so-called event or training, which is either an online training or a virtual classroom training, depends on your preference. And then you will take the course and either you take it as a classroom or as a personal e-learning, as My Learning, and you will have a record on that. And at the end, you will receive this certificate by email. And you will, if you want, get also a reminder when the next training will be requested. So here just some snapshots of the mock-up version, which is already available. So the booking of the training at the beginning on the website, the registration email, you take the course, and at the end you are allowed and you are basically asked to give a feedback on the course, and then in the next step you will receive a certificate, which at the moment, as I said, as a mock-up version, looks like the document you see on the right-hand side. This document can be tailor-made. It can be also adjusted to the needs of a single company, of a training institute, whatsoever. Here we have high flexibility, which is one of the big skills ID Loom is proving since we started working with them, the flexibility to answer on technical requirements by ourselves. How does it look like looking ahead? So we have decided to partner with the German association FSK in Stuttgart to run a pilot phase. This pilot phase in phase 1 will look for a very small number of companies, maximum 10, because we want to handle the process. So we decided to have a staggered approach. And once this phase 1 is completed successful, we would step into phase 2 and finally into phase 3. During these 3 phases, we want to ensure that we cover industrial and professional users, ideally also self-employed people, and that we cover as much as we can also the different sectors and value chains of our industry, which would then allow us to learn as much as possible about our platform and potential improvement areas, which we then can adjust together with Loom. Looking at the entire year as an indicative timeline. So as I said, the pilot phase is planned for March. We would then foresee at the moment to go live with all 3 levels for September this year, and that means in the first place the e-learning. Once we started the pilot in March, we will in parallel finalize our training materials in level 2 and 3. Why is this training material not finalized yet? We are still in close cooperation with major downstream sectors to make sure that for level 2 and level 3, their input and their experience and their knowledge is being taken on board. And then in parallel, we will also work on the translation into all relevant EU languages. You know, these are 24 languages, so this is also quite a job to be done. Hence the reason why we plan at the moment the go live of e-learning for beginning of September in all European member states. The creation and organization of classroom trainings, we want to leave that more to, I would say, the value chains, the national trade associations and the markets. For sure, there are training institutes which are interested, and also trainers, but maybe also one or the other national trade association is interested in providing training. So that all will be possible via this platform. This platform will be made available to those, and against a fee, everybody can register themselves as a trainer or training institute on that platform, following the process I outlined during this presentation. And I think by that, I'm done with my restriction part. I'm not sure, Simon, if we want to do the 3rd question now.
I was thinking that might be a good thing to do. Just asking people on this webinar if you'd be interested in using the Isoprene Reach platform for the training information when it's available. If you'd just like to submit your votes now, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Well, that's even more overwhelming at 90% in favour, Jörg. So that must be very encouraging for you.
It is, absolutely. I'm really impressed, and I'm grateful for all those who are taking part into that poll and that encourages us on our path forward. And really, I'm very happy to see that. Thank you for this feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to use a little bit of our time to inform you also about another regulatory activity, and that is the occupational exposure limit on isocyanates. So to put you into the picture, occupational exposure limits are regulatory values which indicate levels of exposure that are considered to be safe for a chemical substance in the air of a workplace. So if we look at the European Union, today we have occupational exposure limits for isocyanates. Today we have those values for single substances. So, for example, for TDI or for MDI or for HDI, and it also depends from country to country. So there are member states who are having occupational exposure limits on a specific isocyanate, and there are countries who are not having an occupational exposure limit. Back in March 2019, the European Chemical Agency has been tasked by the European Commission to provide an opinion on isocyanates and on occupational exposure limit value. The European Chemical Agency provided that opinion in September last year. And if you look now at the next process steps, then you see that we are here now at the beginning of 2021, and we are currently facing the impact assessment, or the feasibility study, you might call it, which is again contracted by the European Commission to a third party, and the name of that company is Risk Policy Analysts, in short form RPA. They are based in the UK, and they are contracted by the Commission to undergo this impact assessment. So after the European Chemical Agency has provided their opinion in September, the next step was to pick this contractor to see, with the opinion from ECHA, taking different scenarios on board, what would be the impact for our industry? Maybe to make it a bit more pragmatic. So ECHA, unfortunately, has provided very conservative viewpoints on a potential occupational exposure limit value for all isocyanates. So here we can already say it is almost certain that we will see a value at the end of the process which has to be applied for all isocyanates. So there will be no differentiation anymore between TDI, MDI, HDI, or other isocyanates. We always advocated as industry not to follow that route, but unfortunately, the regulators didn't take that on board. So we will see at the end a value for all isocyanates. With this very conservative opinion by ECHA, now the contractor has to look into the different scenarios, what these values and the implementation of these values for you as a user in your company at your production site or plant will mean in terms of investment, or basically, to put it into black and white, cost and benefit analysis. This impact assessment has kicked off last week, and I come to that in a second. And it will run until mid of this year. The Commission will then develop a final report based on the report by the contractor. And that will be the basis for the discussion at this so-called Working Party of Chemicals. This is a tripartite committee under the European Commission, which should come up with an aligned recommendation towards the next committee level, which is called ACSH for final decision making. So the Working Party of Chemicals, as I said, a tripartite committee. What does that mean? In that committee, you will find representatives of employees, so trade unions. You will find representatives of employers, so national associations. And thirdly, representatives of member states, not of all member states, but of member states. Once the WPC and then the ACSH have finalized their opinion, this proposal will go into the next step, which you see at the right end of this slide, which is called the OLP, the ordinary legislative procedure. So because we are facing a binding occupational exposure limit, this proposal needs to go into the European Parliament and into the Council, which then again requires a couple of months. So we expect a final decision on an occupational exposure limit value, for sure not before the end of 22. It might even lead into 23. Coming back to RPA and the impact assessment, this is now a very important and decisive moment for our industry, and I can encourage everybody who is in that webinar, who is responsible or working in a site using isocyanates, regardless of the sector, to participate in that impact assessment. Because this will be the basis for the scenarios and for the cost-benefit analysis, which is done by RPA. And as more feedback we get from the sites, from the plants, from you, the better foundation or basis we have, and RPA is having for making their conclusions. Very clearly, we as industry, what is at risk? At risk is that a very conservative value will lead to major investments for your company or for your plant. In a very, very worst case, it might even lead to a fact that you can't continue your production because the value cannot be met. And that, I think, cannot be the objective. We advocate very clearly that the training, which I talked about in my first part, is the right risk management measure. Setting a very low occupational exposure limit value does not per se lead to the reduction of occupational asthma cases in the isocyanate or polyurethane industry. So that is very, very important. Unfortunately, we have a very, very tight deadline. So the interims report by RPA is requested by April this year, and the final report by July this year. So that means we don't have a lot of time to answer the questionnaire. If you don't have received this questionnaire, then you're more than happy to contact myself. The last slide on this one, or almost the last slide, just gives you an idea. So you see here now values. I'm not sure how much that speaks to you. But at the moment, if we look at the median level for occupational exposure limits, on the left-hand side, you see the so-called time-weighted average. On the right-hand side, you see the so-called short-term exposure limit value. So that means peak exposure. So you see here either 5.1 ppb for the time-weighted average and 10.2 ppb. If you go then down the table and we just look at the last figure, you see, and that is the recommendation or the opinion by ECHA, in which magnitudes we are talking here. This is several hundred times lower than what we currently having established in the European Union as a median level. So you can imagine what that would mean for our industry. I think the two first scenarios, I mean, the first one clearly would be a very good result. The second scenario, we might still live with it, but everything which is below that, so scenario 3, 4, and 5, so going down the table, would mean major impact, negative impact for our industry. So once again, I can only encourage you for those who are in the position to do that. If you not have received the questionnaire yet, please contact me or my assistant, Christine Deval, in the Isopa office, and we will provide you with a link to fill out the questionnaire. The questionnaire is quite lengthy, I have to say, but nevertheless, it is important that we have a broad participation into that consultation. And I think by that, I'm at the end of my presentation. And of course, we will use the remaining time to ask the majority of the questions, or at least some of the questions which will be not answered today, for sure will be answered by email later on. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hand it back to Simon.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jörg. That was a very interesting presentation. I think you covered all of the points very well. We have plenty of questions to be going on with. They seem to break down into approximately 3 areas. One is about the cost. One is about how much isocyanate you'll have to handle to be trained. And the third one is about the whether or not, oddly enough, this presentation will be shared. So starting with that last question first, which is for me really easy to answer, the answer is yes. We will be sharing this presentation after this event, and we'll be in contact with you about that later on. So I think Olaf Lehmann sums things up quite nicely when he asks, how much will the training cost, or will the manufacturers, the ISOPA members, sponsor the training to their customers?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Simon. I think this is, of course, a very important question. I cannot give you at the moment a definite answer on that. What I can say is that we are thinking about, if there is a fee which I would call is a kind of a nominal fee. So we as industry are well aware of the overall situation, and we are not wanting to take advantage on the back of this required training. So what I can say, if you are a trainer, then you have to pay an annual contribution to be on that platform. I think that is reasonable, but the fee for the employee itself, or in total for the company, will be a fee which is rather a nominal fee. Please don't ask me for a concrete number, but I'm sure we are in the position to announce that pretty soon in the future. What I want to add is, you can imagine all these efforts are being done either by sweat equity from our member companies or downstream associations, and by investments from our member companies over the last years. And they were significant. And running this platform, you can imagine, is also nothing which will be at zero cost. So there are costs. But clearly what I can say is the principle for our member companies is that this is not a profit-making exercise. It has the purpose to train people for safe use and handling of isocyanates.
Brilliant. Okay, well that's very, very clear. A further question is, whereabouts in the supply chain will people need to be trained? I mean, if you're an isocyanate manufacturer, it's pretty obvious. If you're a formulator in the EU, that's also pretty obvious. But what about somebody making refrigerators in the European Union? Would they, if such a person exists, for example, or insulated panels, would they have to train their workers?
Yes, so if I take the example you have just chosen, Simon, somebody who is working in a refrigerator making plant, you are handling isocyanates, at least in the area when parts of the refrigerator is being filled with foam for insulation. So you would need to undergo a training. Legally, your employer has to make sure that you receive that training. So in case of that example, the company would probably do a block registration for their employees on the platform, and then the company has to decide if they want to do it as an e-learning or if they decide to prefer an in-house classroom training. That will be also possible. It will be even made possible offline. Or if you want to use a virtual trainer. But yes, you would need to get the training.
And what if I have part-time staff? Will they still need to be trained?
Very good question. So the training material includes also information about so-called bystanders. So clearly somebody who is temporarily employed, or is doing any kind of maintenance work in the plant, he is requested to receive that training. Are you a visitor and passing by the production site? Of course, this doesn't require training, but from a pure safety point of view, this person at least should get some kind of instructions, but it would not require the training I just explained. But maintenance workers, temporary workers, yes, they are required to receive such training.
Fantastic. And just to make sure that it's even the isocyanates supplied by non-European producers, such as, for example, Wanhua, Kumo, Mitsui, and so on, will have to be tested. It's about the material. It's about using the material. It's not about where the material comes from, isn't it?
Absolutely, Simon. So it is basically the license to operate within the European Union. If you are an importer of such material into the European Union, you are basically on the same level as a placer on the market, as somebody who would produce the material in the European Union. So you are required to provide training material. If there are any of those importers in that webinar, you are happy to contact me, and we would get in contact with you to talk about the details of joining the platform, so that you then also can provide the training material via the platform to your customers. Or alternatively, of course, you can develop your own training material based on the legislation. But clearly, we as Isopa Alipa, we strive, let me put it this way, I think we are aware of our leadership role, and we want to take this leadership role seriously. But on the other hand, we are not creating a monopoly. Anybody can develop the training material based on the legislation.
Excellent. That was very good. Will a couple of questions here about the UK. Will these restrictions apply within the UK, or as far as you know?
As we now have a decision, I think the UK is taking over in a UK REACH version, to my knowledge, and with that regard, the same would apply also for then the companies being based in the UK. And if you are based in the UK and you want to export into European Union, then the same applies as for somebody who is exporting it from outside the EU into the European Union.
Exactly. I think that is probably a question for either DEFRA or BIS. Either of those government departments in the UK would probably be able to give you an answer at some point. A question here about people supplying and installing equipment. Will tech service engineers require training?
Which kind of engineers?
Machinery engineers, tech service.
Okay. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, these are what I meant with maintenance. Maybe maintenance is not, including those, but everybody who would work in that area, being not employed with a company, but doing work either as a service engineer, working on the equipment. I mean, he is running a risk of being exposed, and of course, we need to make sure that also those people are being trained. I mean, it is not to make their life difficult. It is to protect them for a potential hazard, and hence the reason, yes, they would also need to get the training.
I've got a question here about trainers. Is the option to be a trainer restricted to citizens of the European Union, or can anybody from around the world become a trainer?
Everybody from around the world can become a trainer. There's no restriction with regard to their citizenship or where they live. Actually, but this is really, I would say, brainstorm level. We think about extending that platform once it is established and is well running, to establish that platform beyond the European Union and to offer it also maybe in other languages than just the European ones. And by that, although maybe in some other regions of the world there is no legal requirement, but you would have then the opportunity to offer your employees e-learning training in a language, let's say Arabian language, or any other language from Africa, Russia, Turkey. So yes, but coming back to your question, Simon, no restriction.
Cool. Somebody's asking how they can become a trainer, and I guess that's probably best dealt with you offline after this event.
Well, we have a trainer profile, which is, let's say, almost finalized, and this trainer profile defines the skill set a trainer would need to provide. We will then, but that needs to be still finalized in detail. We will run through a kind of an assessment test. So we want to make sure we have some kind of proof that this person does know and can explain isocyanate. And once that is proven, preferably also with a kind of a education as a safety good advisor, or background in chemicals, or background even in polyurethanes. Once the committee has approved this person, then the person would be allowed to register himself as a trainer on the platform, and he could then offer trainings he would organize.
Excellent. I've got a question here about who's responsible for enforcing this, and how the which authorities will make sure that people are being trained?
The enforcement is clearly with the authorities. So each member state is basically, as I said, requested to report after 5 years about the success of that restriction. So the member states have to make sure that they can do this, and we would support such reporting with the data which is generated on the platform, of course, by respecting the GDPR and all other compliance rules. But of course, we would be also interested to see how many people have been trained, in which country, how many people, but we are not interested in any kind of market data. So that will be all well protected and legally sound. But the enforcement is with the member states, although we will, in our communication, highlight that also from a supplier point of view, we have a leadership role and a responsibility to ensure that when we supply material to a customer, that this customer understands the product, understands the requirement for a training, but it doesn't go that far that a supplier has to enforce the customer if he has been trained or not.
Sure, okay. And just to be very clear, the training has to be provided by the company that is using the diisocyanate, doesn't it?
Yes, it is the responsibility of the employer or of the self-employed person, very clearly, yes.
So it wouldn't be the person issuing an MSDS. The importer or the trader would not be responsible for providing the training. It would be the company using.
Yes.
Right, okay. I just wanted to make that very clear. I've got a couple of questions about people formulating paints or adhesives. They want to know if they can use the platform to train their workers and customers. And somebody else is asking about one component foams. But maybe if we take the first one about who could use your platform?
Yes, the platform will be open because we are well aware of our different value chains. We have short value chains, I would call it. So in case you produce the isocyanate and then you deliver it to a producer of mattresses, and the company produces the mattresses and of it goes to the retailer. That is, I would call, a pretty short value chain. But we have also value chains which are longer. So in the case of paints, we start with the isocyanate producer. It goes to a company who makes the mixture. It might go to a retailer, and then it ends up with the end customer who's doing the painting. So all these members of the value chain are allowed to use our platform. As I said, they need to register themselves in case of a trainer, in-house trainer, or they just allow their employees an e-learning, and then there would be, as I explained, a nominal fee required to do the e-learning.
Excellent. Well, we are in our last 5 minutes now, Jörg. So there've been a couple of questions about how you assess the level of training that's needed for each person, and can people go straight to level 2 or 3? Do they have to go to 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, very, very good question. So at the beginning, you will undergo an assessment, and this assessment we try to make as user-friendly as possible. And by the assessment, so where you need to click, am I working in an industrial or professional area? Am I using the substance as an adhesive, or am I working in a foaming plant? By that, the training path is basically defined. And the legal text clearly defines everything which goes under level 1, which is probably the majority of those who have to be trained. But for example, if you spray inside a booth, you would need to go to level 2 and potentially to level 3. But this can only be done if you have taken 1 first. So it is a build-up process. Either you have to take only general 1, then you are done. If you have 2, level 2 or level 3, you have to take level 1 and then level 2 and then level 3, and you end up with a certificate.
Fine, fine. Another question is whether the regulation applies to adhesives or one-component foams you can buy in the hardware shop.
Yeah, for one-component foams, if they fall under the scope, which means more than 0.1% monomeric isocyanate content, they would fall under that restriction. Those products could be bought in a do-it-yourself shop. This might be the case, but we clearly have to understand that this restriction is not for consumer users. But we have an overlap of products which you are using as a professional, in which you are using as a consumer. We know that. But the focus is especially on those products which contain more than 0.1%. And we have developed a special training together with the Adhesive and Sealants Association to adjust the training needs, especially for those professionals working in adhesive and sealants.
And I've got a question here about whether prepolymers used in case applications would need to be tested, trained for, sorry, restricted.
Yeah, if you are a producer of a prepolymer, then you are basically placing the substance on the market. That means you fall under the category of placer. So you would need to make sure, first of all, that your own employees are being trained and that your customers are being informed about that they should be trained as well under the new restrictions. So they basically fall in both categories.
Fine. That always sounds uncomfortable to have your feet on 2 horses. It's never a good place to be. Well, with that, we've more or less reached the end of our presentation today. I'd like to thank you very much indeed, Jörg, for spending the time talking us through what is going to be a very interesting period of time for the polyurethane industry. But then I'd say, when isn't there an interesting period of time for the polyurethane industry? That's my job. And I'd like to thank all of the people who have taken part today. All of the people who have some really fabulous questions, the kind of things that we need to really understand. We're going to be running these webinars on similar kinds of topics over the course of the year, fingers crossed. If anything you want to know about or you think we should cover, please contact me. My contact details are in our magazine, Urethanes Technology International, or send me an email through the website. That would be great, or Skype me even. I hope to see at least some of you at our event in Dubai on the 26th and 28th of October this year. We can all travel by then, and we'll all have been vaccinated, and it'll all be good. So with luck, I'll see you all there. But thank you very much indeed for your time. Donna, I think you could probably turn this off now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you to everybody.